Can you hear me? My name is Deborah Simmons. I am against the adoption of any of the proposed instructional materials for health education. In the mid-90s, former president of Planned Parenthood and daughter of former Governor Ann Richards, Cecile Richards, formed the Texas Freedom Network, also known as TFN, to combat the anti-choice radical policy agenda of the extreme right in Texas. Over 14 years ago, TFN launched a SHAC initiative with a series of public information requests encouraging members to infiltrate SHACs to push comprehensive sex education. In 2019, SECUS, an organization founded by the former medical director of Planned Parenthood, using seed money from Hugh Hefner, joined TFN to write a white paper called Teach the Truth, declaring that the SBOE Health Teaks and Instructional Materials adoption was a once-in-a-generation opportunity to change the course for sex education in Texas. The abortion industry celebrated last year's adoption of 617 student expectations across 6 strands for K-12 health education TEAK standards. This year, the 87th legislature amended Texas Education Code 28.004 to require parental consent, also known as opt-in, before human sexuality instruction, child abuse, family violence, dating violence, or sex trafficking may be taught in the classroom. These subjects must also go through school district board adoption processes, providing SHAC transparency, hearings, and parental notification. I have provided a handout listing the chapters and courses that include any content for the 5 opt-in subjects. Adoption of these textbooks would conflict with 28.004 and accomplish the incrementalism pushed by the abortion industry for comprehensive sex education in Texas. Allow the school districts to choose materials that reflect the community values as provided in 28.004. Do not give competitive advantage to any materials that fall short of the best advice and the best product possible. The children of Texas deserve better than the content in these materials. Thank you.
And Debbie, I've got some questions specifically for you. I appreciate everyone's work they did. Debbie, I spent a lot of time going over the material that you sent us. Very thorough documents through all this. But I had some specific questions. I want to start on Goodhart Wilcox. The information you sent us talked about how the reviewers object to the content specifically on page 583 in middle school, which talks about, do you know how to get testing for STIs? Do you know what resources offer testing for HIV? Are you aware of PREP and PEP reducing the risk of HIV transmission? So we have that in the TEAKs on 23F. So I guess my question is, how would you recommend that this is taught? I do believe that PREP and PEP is probably taught in the instructional material to a greater degree than needs to be. But those other issues, how would you recommend that those standards be taught in the instructional material?
That's a really good question. It's probably a great question for people who have been certified in sexual risk avoidance as specialists. It's been my observation that when I look at a sexual risk avoidance program, it does not go into that much detail. And the direction that is always placed on the children.
Can I ask a real quick question on that point right there? Are
Sure.
you saying that for all of those or just for the PRP and the PREP?
For just the general subject. It's obvious with Goodhart Wilcox that it was not written by sexual risk avoidance specialists. Had it been, you would have seen the primary health model of risk avoidance, and that students that are engaging in these risky behaviors should be moved to the primary health model of avoiding the risks, and they should also be directed to their parents. And so it was really interesting because as many times as it talks about testing and STIs and the problems there, there's very little mention of parents and the concerns there about the risky behavior that the children are engaging in.
Okay. Some of these questions may be along the same line, but also on page 591, you pointed out that 2 of the most effective methods for preventing STIs include sexual abstinence and the use of condoms. Now, the new TEAKs require barrier protection and other contraceptive methods to be taught. So kind of same question on barrier method. How would you recommend that that's taught in that specifically TEAK in 7th and 8th grade 23L?
Right. So the answer is the same, that a sexual risk avoidance program would first address the fact that children are engaging in risky behavior and attempt to move them to a risk avoidance situation. The way that it's worded in Goodhart Wilcox consistently is that they're equal and that abstinence is merely a method of contraception.
Okay. I've got two more examples I just wanted to get your opinion on, because like I said, we went through this in some good detail. For Health 1 and Health 2 on page 469, you objected to where it says the passage about lately some of your friends who are dating have started talking about becoming sexually active, so that everyone in a serious dating relationship has sex. We do have TEKS also about refusal skills, and when you look at the rest of that statement right there, it's about making the decision to wait. I guess my question, I feel somehow that some of the content that you put in there, when you look at the full context, it is in an abstinence section. But when you have a section there that just brings in that quote, do you feel that in the full context of those statements that it is more in an abstinence-based piece of information than maybe what your information led to?
I don't remember that exact example, nor do I remember which lesson it's in. If it's in the abstinence, the 7 pages of abstinence, that would be a specific section that concentrates on abstinence. Throughout the rest of the text, you don't see those types of messages lacing through. Again, abstinence is presented equally with contraception methods. So refusal skills, whether it's sexual risk or any risky behavior, should always be directing the children back to avoiding those risky behaviors. And so we want to see more of a conversation around risky behavior without normalizing sexual activity among children. And that's what some of those examples tend to do, is it normalizes that all children are having sex, or many children in your peer groups. It positions it as it's a normal behavior, and we want to move children away from that.
Okay. There's my last example. I think it's along those same lines too. On page 506, it talks about healthy dating relationships should include honest communication about physical intimacy, including sexual activity. Again, when you look at that in the whole context, I think it is in an abstinence-based section, but the little phrase you pick out doesn't necessarily show that. So now let me open this question up to all four of y'all. When we've received a lot of communication, there's a lot of communication that's saying reject all 4 textbooks. We've received additional communication that's saying to adopt Goodhart, Wilcox, and Quaver Ed. The State Board of Education adopted list, as different than it was in the past, is not required for a district to use that list. You know, many years ago, that if a book wasn't on the State Board adopted list, essentially it probably wasn't a book that was going to end up in classrooms. That's different now, that districts can still purchase a book that's not on our list, as I know all of you know. So my question that I want to ask y'all, and for anyone to chime in on, is if the State Board of Education did adopt no instructional material for health, would you feel what kind of vacuum that would lead to? And if there was a vacuum there, districts are going to need to find some material. I think as history has shown that most districts purchase material off the State Board adopted list. So the concern is that it creates a vacuum, and that at that point in time, if we have what there's been testimony that we've received communication to, specifically for Goodhart, Wilcox, and Quaver, an adequate book, a good book, are they going to go find something else that might be, maybe in your eyes, much worse than what we have here? So that's a question for all.
I would like to challenge the idea that we would give any competitive advantage to a program that is not the best program. School districts that want to adopt radical sex education or radical programs are going to do that. When you look at these programs as a whole, the pervasiveness, not just in the sex education, but throughout the entire text, the health tracking, the surveys, everything about them, if the State Board of Education adopts them and puts them on a list, then that will give a competitive advantage to these programs. What happens to those the sexual risk avoidance specialists in your neighborhoods, in your areas? That disadvantages them. They won't win the business. They won't win the opportunity to get into the classrooms, because the school districts are going to want to choose what's on the instructional list. And so my point is that we can't look at the market as these are the best options, or, oh, well, this is all we could get. I actually think it would disadvantage some of the very good programs that are possible out there. It's an economic perspective.
All right, Ms. Pettis?
Not everybody on the panel of 4 has expressed this, but a couple of you have, and so I'm wondering what your better or replacement recommendation might be. You express concern about students not talking to their parents, or that the book doesn't go specifically into, please speak to your parents. And coming from a perspective of multiple school districts, in the 1,200 school districts, there are several thousands of Texas students who don't have parents. So who would they go to?
The simple answer is that, just like the law, they should be going to parents or legal guardians. And these materials don't direct them to either.
You know, health is more than just sex education. And so I was going to question the Quaver is the one that has the elementary stuff that's, you know, other stuff. What I'm concerned about is it's a very expensive program, very expensive program. And right now, in a great majority of our schools, they're not even teaching the 4 core subjects, or not doing them to the degree they need to be done. Social studies is virtually not taught in the elementary schools. And so how much of this health curriculum do you envision being taught in those elementary schools, even after a school district pays? I personally don't think that the virtual way of teaching is the best way, and I think this is an all-virtual program. But the thing about it is, after having studied these books, do you think that the teacher needs this guidance of this kind of material for the K through 5?
Quaver Ed is an interesting product, and I'm going to call it that. It's a product. They're trying to sell something. It's laid out in 8 modules and 4 lessons each module. So it's the intention, you can tell, is that the children are to sit down at the computer for 5 to 10 minutes a day. So you have 8 modules, 4 lessons for the 4 weeks in a month, and then you have 5 daily doses. So 10 minutes each day. And it's funny because when I looked at the kindergarten, it would probably take more than a half an hour to even get it set up each time, you know, for the children. The first thing the children do when they sit down is they're to go into the health tracker and log an emoji that reflects their mood for the day. And then the teacher can assign, like, journaling. It depends on the different things, whether it's meditation, whether it's an active game like vaccination tag, whether it's a head lice matching card game. It's all video game structure, or maybe some interactive things in the day. But these 5 daily doses would be throughout the week. So every single day of the year, it's expected to do some of this health education. We talked about one time when I was here, the way that some teachers would integrate health into other subjects. This is a concentrated effort, and yet the reading levels are really high in inappropriate areas and then very low in other subjects. So Quaver Ed is just a very strange product for an audience that I think is meant to make money for the company, but I doubt that it would deliver the health results that any of you were looking for when you approve these TEKS.
What about the ability of the teacher to take the TEKS and develop their own without an extra, set resource? I mean, they wouldn't really need, because some of it is a very low, eating right and that sort of thing would be. Is it really necessary to have a text?
If they purchased Quaver, they would obviously want to use it because they've spent all this money on it. Do I think that the TEKS could be implemented in the classroom by the teachers? I guess. I'm not actually for a lot of the robust comprehensive standards that were adopted. But I don't see it taking that much work. You don't need 5 days of head lice in kindergarten and 5 days of head lice in grade 1 for your one student expectation Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I just think that it's really excessive, and I could see with the games and the songs and the movement that's involved in Quaver, how it would cost that much. I mean, I can see why the price is very high. I had not really thought of that. But again, it's the only one that was introduced K through 5 and that has made it through the process this far. And yet it's invasive surveys and journaling, private teacher chats, all inappropriate.
Okay, any other questions? Ms. Hardy, is that good? Any other questions?